Civilization. It's a word we associate with our species' history, perhaps more than any other. But the actual age of civilization is but a snapshot in the overreaching timeline of humanity. Modern humans evolved in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago, and for only around 6,000 years of that have we organized ourselves into civilizations. However, in that 6,000 or so year period, humans have become more technologically advanced than nature ever seemingly intended. We have built wonders, waged wars, developed technologies, and have even left the confines of our planet to pursue a new frontier beyond our atmosphere. But how did we get here? In this video, we'll be taking a look at the entire story of human civilization, from its humble beginnings to its tumultuous present. This will see us travel to the civilizations of every continent in the habitable world, from the fertile plains of Mesopotamia to the bustling streets of New York City. Along the way, we will encounter the key cultures, movements, and individuals that have spurred our species on to notoriety and advancement, for better and for worse. Let's bring you the story of everyone alive today, the story of civilization. The Ziggurat of Ur may not be a common household name when it comes to the historical monuments of human history, but is perhaps the most significant. Located in what is today the Dikwa Governorate of Iraq, this extravagant mud brick temple, 64 meters long by 45 meters wide and rising to a height of 30 meters, is the most noticeable remnant of the world's first civilization. The ziggurat is an amazing structure to bear witness to. A grand staircase leads up to a dense stone wall with intricate architectural details that really give you a picture of what it was like in the day of the Sumerians, its builders. It served as an important temple in the state of Ur and has been built and rebuilt several times over the course of ancient history. This, then, is essentially the oldest known wonder of civilization. But who built it, and how did they come to be? The ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia, who built the ziggurat under the guidance of King Ur-Manu, were the first complex society of the ancient world, with a developed state, social structure, and writing system. This is what defines a civilization. Hierarchical social classes split their labor into industries and divisions, often amidst the bustling streets of a highly built urban area, a city. Outside of these cities, territories and borders contain agricultural lands, trade routes, possibly an organized military, and many smaller settlements or residential areas. They took on a multitude of different forms depending on where you were in the world, and followed different religions and ideologies, but the basic ingredients of a civilization remained the same. So the first civilization, the Sumerians, along with the Hittites, Babylonians, Harappans, and Egyptians that would soon follow, were able to define this new way of living because of agriculture. Farming wasn't just part of life in these ancient times, it was life itself. When humans started farming the fertile floodplains and river valleys of Mesopotamia, they were able to rely on the same stretches of land year upon year without having to relocate as nomads. This new reliable way of acquiring resources annually led to the development of trade routes, as a civilization's neighbors followed suit. Different lands had access to different resources, and so trade was necessary to keep a wide range of resources flowing through the land. Civilizations would soon become defined by cultural and physical borders, with cultures often being inexplicably linked to the resources available in the immediate vicinity. Social structure began to play a huge part in the development of these fledgling nations. A central government with a defined set of rules or ideologies were key to maintaining order and control over the land and people of the first civilizations, while the division of labor into professions and industries helped spur on the advancement of technologies. For the first time in history, specialized tradespeople could perform the tasks they were best at, and could subsequently become even better at them. Knowledge could then be passed down from generation to generation, recorded in the form of writing. The first writing system, cuneiform, can also be accredited to the Sumerians, who inscribed universally understood characters onto stone tablets. Trade deals, messages, complaints, and even early jokes have been discovered, etched on tablets among the ruins of early civilizations. Among the most important pieces of early writing dates back to 1754 BCE, when Hammurabi, king of the old Babylonian Empire, developed his eponymous code of laws. Prior to this, the laws of civilization had centered around compensating those who had been victims of crimes. Hammurabi, on the other hand, felt that the perpetrators of crimes should be punished. Criminals were now to be physically reprimanded, and the code introduced phrases such as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth into society, still quoted to this very day. This was a turning point for the laws of civilization. As harsh as they may seem, Hammurabi wanted to make sure that anybody in his society could obtain justice, from the poor to the rich. Of course, not everybody prospered in these early civilizations. Class systems were present all across the ancient world, with a select few holding power at the top. These ruling elites, often the king and his closest associates, held power over the poor in society, who comparatively had nothing. Slavery was rife, with slaves having little to no rights when compared to a free man. Laws such as Hammurabi's helped to ensure that anybody who was going to partake in civilization would be doing so under the agreement that they had to play by the book. One of the most spectacular characteristics of these first civilizations, however, was their tendencies to build big. The Great Pyramids, the Hanging Gardens, Solomon's Temple. These early cultures strived to preserve their legacy and leave their mark on the world. This wasn't just an ancient thing. Before long, civilizations all over the world and throughout history would be following suit, each one attempting to make something grander, something more majestic than the last. Of course, with the development of cultures, borders, and dynasties, war would soon follow. Weapons technologies saw the development of new, deadly mechanisms that were designed to breach cities and end human life on an unprecedented scale. Recurved bows, folded blades, advanced armor, siege weapons, and war chariots were just some of the ways that nations defended themselves from attack and attempted to take over others. War was prolific in the ancient world as civilizations began to find their footing. In some cases, it was a kill or be killed situation, as cultures desperately attempted to defend themselves against bands of raiders or warmongering neighbors. But it would soon become apparent that war was part of human nature. Large-scale conquests and military operations would see the most powerful empires of the ancient world clash, which inevitably ended in blood. Before long, civilization began to slowly radiate outwards, with Mesopotamia as a starting point. Early civilizations in what would one day become China started cultivating rice, and by 1600 BCE, the Shang dynasty were in power. Further south, the Harappan, or Indus Valley Civilization, starting in 300 BCE, built thoroughly planned cities on the fertile plains of what would eventually become Pakistan. Meanwhile in Europe, the Minoan civilization, known for their intricately painted murals and frescoes, would appear around 3100 BCE on the island of Crete. Civilization was soon gracing every continent except for Antarctica, and we were here to stay. From the 8th century BC to the 5th century AD, Europe began to take center stage, as civilizations such as ancient Greece and ancient Rome shot up to power. This was known as the Classical period, beginning with the poetry of Homer in Greece, and ending with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In Greece, cultural movements sparked the development of new ways of thinking, as the great philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, and Diogenes, and their contemporaries, revolutionized the way the world was perceived. Theatre squares, bustling with actors and attendees, provided the dawn of the entertainment industry, an art form we still enjoy all over the world today. In Athens, in roughly 507 BCE, democracy would be born, when Cleisthenes introduced a series of political reforms that focused on the people and not just the powerful, having a say in the way their civilization was run. Citizens of Athens would now vote on important issues, elect a ruler, and finally have their voice heard. The ancient Greeks would also expand their influence by way of colonization. Not only was the Greek mainland an archipelago under their cultural domain, but between 750 and 550 BC, Greek influence would spread to the northern coast of Egypt, as well as Cyprus, Turkey, Italy, and parts of the Iberian Peninsula. Greek culture and religion would soon dominate the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions, as undeniably Greek city-states began to emerge. These city-states would not always get along. as we would soon see in the Peloponnesian War, which saw Athens go head-to-head with Sparta. A Spartan victory would eventually be undermined by the rise of one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever seen, Alexander the Great. In what has become known as the Hellenistic period, Alexander would march his enemies across Egypt, Persia, Israel, Judah, and Central Asia, establishing the largest empire ever known at the time. It wasn't long before something interesting began to unravel in what would one day become Italy. The Etruscan civilization, who had great influence in the north of Italy around 800 BC, would precede the ancient Roman kingdom. Evidence of Roman settlement around what would eventually become the Roman Forum traces back to around 750 BC, but by the time Alexander the Great had died, in 323 BC, Rome was fully established as a republic. The republic would find itself in a near constant state of war, with the Etruscans that persisted to the north, and the Gauls who lived in scattered Celtic tribes across northwestern Europe. The Roman Republic would go on to conquer the entire Italian peninsula before taking part in a series of conquests to Macedonia, Carthage, Egypt, and Numidia. Then, in 27 BCE, the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire, as Augustus Caesar, adopted son as Julius Caesar, established an autocracy, making all the important decisions of the empire as a dictator. What followed was the Pax Romana, a golden age that saw the rise of imperialism and one of the most secure empires the world has ever seen. Under Roman rule, Europe would see influxes of culture from all over Eurasia and Africa, organized military unlike anything that preceded it, and the spread of Christianity across the ancient world. It was not to last, however. The Roman Empire came crashing down in 476 AD when Germanic king Odoacer led his troops to the city's gates, deposing the child emperor Romulus Augustulus and establishing himself as the ruler of Italy. The greatest empire the world had ever seen was no more. The fall of the Roman Empire saw civilization emerge in what has been largely dubbed the medieval era, also known as the Middle Ages or Dark Ages. Fans of our Medieval Madness YouTube channel will know all about this period of history. This is a massive period of human civilization that spanned from 476 AD to around 1450 AD, nearly 1,000 years. The medieval era was largely characterized by soaring highs and plummeting lows. Disease, war, famine, population decline, and the clash of religions dominated this new world. While technological innovations, agricultural booms, and the rise of new forms of art provided intriguing new opportunities. In Eastern Europe and Western Asia, the Byzantine Empire essentially acted as the Roman Empire's spiritual successor. Yet it saw frequent clashes with the Muslim caliphites of the Middle East and the Ottoman Empire of Anatolia. At the end of the 13th century, Tuareg warriors led by Osman I were able to establish power bases across what would one day become Turkey. Their small, largely insignificant kingdom soon became a major world power, which culminated in their capture of Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, at the very end of the medieval period. Religion, of course, dominated the medieval era. The Christian West and the Muslim East frequently came to blows across most of the High Middle Ages, often triggered by a Christian desire to reclaim the Holy Land, taking it from the Muslim leaders of the Middle East. The Muslims managed to hold their own, despite the massive onslaught of soldiers from the West entering their lands, and retained the Middle East under their culture and religion. Meanwhile in Europe, efforts were made to Christianize the last remaining pagan groups of the continent. As the line between church and state blurred, governments were founded upon the upholding of Christian values, and blasphemy could be punished severely. As the medieval period progressed, life became difficult for the civilizations of the world. Diseases such as the bubonic plague ravaged populations across Europe and Western Asia, while large-scale conquests and warfare killed many more. The largest continuous land empire the world has ever seen, Genghis Khan's Mongolia, overthrew most of China and made its way into Eastern Europe. All over the globe, from the British Isles to the Indonesian archipelago, warfare was developing, and developing fast. Siege weapons unlike anything seen on the battlefield before were causing untold destruction, as mighty fortresses dominated the skylines of cities across the world. One particular weapon, invented in China during the early medieval period, would change warfare forever: gunpowder. An explosive mixture of saltpeter, sulfur and charcoal was used in warfare as early as the 10th century, which saw Chinese armies raining down fire arrows and makeshift bombs down onto their opponents. Genghis Khan brought the technology with him to Europe, and it gradually assimilated into the arsenals of Western civilizations. By the start of the 13th century, metal barrels that could fire a projectile, spurred on by an explosion of gunpowder, had been invented, and so the gun was born. Despite the hardships, culture and trade blossomed. Civilizations in Africa, such as the Mainlandese Empire, were able to generate extreme wealth on account of the salt and gold deposits within their lands, while in Asia, feudal Japan established one of the richest and most revered cultures in all of human history. Medieval fairs, jousting tournaments, and bountiful feasts adorned the keeps of Europe. This culture is what we associate with the medieval world today, and glimpses of it can often be seen on our own. Soon, however, the civilizations of the Western world were setting their sights on a different prize. In 1492 AD, Christopher Columbus would make his first voyage across the Atlantic Ocean to the west on behalf of the Spanish crown. While he was looking for trade routes with the civilizations of the East, he discovered something unbeknownst to those of the Old World: the Americas. He was not the first European to set foot in the Americas. The Vikings made it to Newfoundland long before him, but what he did next would set off a chain of events that would change the world forever. When he landed in the Caribbean, he encountered tribal peoples, the Lukian, and Taino, and the Arawak. Neither culture had any idea that the other existed. To the Europeans, these people were simple, timid, and ill-adapted to the world in which they lived. He could not have been more wrong. All across the Americas, from northern Alaska to southern Chile, native cultures were flourishing, and had been all this time. The Incas had built stone cities in the clouds amongst the Andes, while the Aztecs presided over one of the largest cities in the world, Tenochtitlan, in what would eventually become Mexico City. Further north, countless rich cultures of Native Americans and First Nations peoples ruled the plains, forests, and wetlands, all of them unaware of the encroaching threat. Returning to Spain with several kidnapped natives, Columbus reported his findings to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. The dawn of European colonialism had arrived. News of Columbus's voyage spread fast. Soon, civilizations across Europe were sending explorers to the New World. The Spanish and Portuguese initially led the charge, driven by a hunger for gold and their desire to spread the word of God. Spanish conquistadors would march on the Aztecs, Incas, Mapuche, and more, destroying cultures, spreading diseases, burning cities, and enslaving citizens. Portuguese settlements would start cropping up in what would one day become known as Brazil, and by the mid-1700s, European presence could be found in much of the Americas. To the north, English and French settlers arrived in the lands that would one day become the United States and Canada. The Americas were not enough, however, and soon the civilizations of Europe set their sights on the rest of the world. To name just a few, India, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Congo, and many other islands across the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans would come under European rule. Meanwhile in Europe, wealth and culture were bursting at the seams. The Renaissance had arrived, which saw classical Greek and Roman imagery flourish in art once again. Literature, science, and philosophy made huge advancements, ushering in a new golden age for European culture. This continued until roughly the 16th century, marking a significant shift from the medieval world to the one we find ourselves in today. What happened next would revolutionize the world in more ways than one. Between 1760 and 1830, a series of occurrences in Britain started to influence major shifts in the way the world worked. Coal and iron became the center of industrial activity, and factories began to mass-produce goods to be shipped across the empire. The invention of the steam engine was a huge step towards the mechanization of labor. The Industrial Revolution was here, but it came at a cost. Machines began to replace manpower across Europe as these new technologies began to spread, leading to an unfair divide between the working and upper classes. Unemployment led to poverty, poverty led to starvation. Europe was saving time and money like never before, but the wealth did not belong to the people. Still, the world as we know it today was beginning to take shape. Cities became smoky metropolises and sprawled out for miles as the population grew. Gradually, the nations of Europe would follow suit. However, there was turmoil in the colonies. Shortly after the Industrial Revolution started, the American Revolution would take place. 13 colonies broke from British rule to form the United States of America. The American Revolutionary War, which started in April of 1775, saw great battles across the eastern states, with George Washington commanding armies of separatists. He was of course successful, and the British were forced to recede in 1781. Now, across the world, colonies were starting to shake. In the 19th century, Spain would lose several colonies in the Americas, such as Argentina, Paraguay, Chile, and Mexico, to independence, marking an end to European rule. Throughout the centuries that followed, much of the world would follow suit, leaving the civilizations of Europe with just a handful of overseas territories. Brazil, India, South Africa, Australia, Canada, and many more would become independent nations, each with their own cultures and traditions. It wasn't just the colonies that were rising up, however. From 1789 to 1799, the French Revolution took place. The social inequality in France had reached a breaking point, and the French monarchy continued to lead lavish lifestyles while the empire racked up debt. The storming of the Bastille led to the Jacob's Reign of Terror, which ended with the beheadings of the likes of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Subsequently, the turmoil in France led to Napoleon Bonaparte taking power in a coup, and a new age of war was ushered into the West. With the arrival of the 20th century, new innovations began to transform the world once again. The telephone, the television, cars, aeroplanes, film and sound recording, all brought new opportunities for the civilizations of the world, ushering in a new age of mass media. Scientific progress in the medical field allowed for blood transfusions, organ transplants, and new types of medicine, which extended life expectancy far beyond what our ancestors thought was possible. However, inequality still ravaged many of the world's nations, and former European colonies in Africa and South America struggled with poverty as resources continued to dwindle. And then, the largest world events of the 20th century were to take place: the two world wars that loomed on the horizon. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand acted as the catalyst for World War I, or the Great War, which saw nations across the planet engage in bloody combat unlike anything seen before. Planes, tanks, machine guns, trenches, and battleships entered the fray, while 8 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives. The Treaty of Versailles ordered Germany to pay huge reparations following their loss, while the League of Nations was set up to ensure this would not happen again. And then, in September of 1939, it did. Adolf Hitler, the new fascist dictator of Germany, had invaded Poland, which led to Britain and France declaring war on Germany in turn. In 1941, the Soviet Union was brought into the Allied side after a German invasion, while Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, in turn forcing the United States to retaliate. In 1942, the Nazis began implementing their final solution, which saw the extermination of the Jewish people taking place across German territories in Europe. By 1944, the tide was turning, and Allied armies began to advance into the heart of Europe to put an end to Hitler's reign. Meanwhile, in Asia, atomic bombs were dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unleashing a terrifying power onto the battlefield. Germany officially surrendered on May 8, 1945, marking the end of World War II. The Cold War that followed wasn't easy, as the United States entered a worrying rivalry with the Soviet Union. The threat of nuclear war loomed constantly in the background, as arms races, espionage, and propaganda took center stage. The United States entered proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam, while the USSR supported opposing sides. By 1991, the Soviet Union had fallen, with hasty reforms from leader Mikhail Gorbachev unintentionally quickening its downfall. The world we know today was here, yet the struggles of civilization would continue. As we embark further into the 21st century, we continue to live in a world of extremes. Economic collapse and war continue to loom over a world that experiences greater levels of wealth than ever before, while life expectancies continue to soar. The media is more powerful than ever, and news is available at the click of a button. Still, inequality persists, and revolution is often sparked around the world. We stand today on the brink of a changing world once more. Rising populations, unrest, and climate change, either caused naturally or by us, threatens to topple our civilization. Humanity has never been easy to maintain, as we have seen from the beginning of time up until this day. The question is, where will it take us next?